You're listening to the Legion of Reason.
Welcome to episode 154 of the Legion of Reason, podcasting a critical line of sometimes less than critical world. Join us as Prez Kris, Feisty Twyla, and Nate, who has yet to have a moniker attached to him. And yours truly, the Supreme Irreverend Dr. Randy Tyson, as we delve into a subject which surprises many to learn is unfortunately all too common in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and that is prayer in public schools. We have two guests with us for this episode. Dusti Hennenfent was born and raised in Moose Jaw and left home to pursue a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Saskatchewan, which is my alma mater. Following the successful completion of her degree, she traveled teaching English in South Korea and probably to the locals in Houston and Washington State, seeing some of the comments down south. She moved back to the Moose Jaw region, and is married with two children of grade school age, apropos to what we're going to be talking about with these two people. And this is her first foray into the world of secular activism. Also with us this evening is Luke Fevin. Luke, we met each other at a conference in Red Deer, and he's done numerous conferences as well as being a social rights activist specializing in secularism and education. He's a regular contributor to television, radio, and web media, and is primarily concerned over the separate Catholic school system, prayer in schools, and public environments, and the impact of religious privilege on the LGBTQ2 community. What's the Q2 in there? I'm not sure. I've never heard of that before. In his spare time, Luke sits on the board of the Society of Edmonton Atheists and is co-founder of the two secular groups, A Pupil and the Society of Albertans United for Separation of State and Church. I keep wanting to say church and state. It's kind of a bit of a mouthful there when you're used to, well, I'm half American, so it's a bit of a difficult read for me. Anyway, so now, Dusti, you're a self-described atheist, and could you give me sort of a short history of your own lack of belief? Were you always, kind of like me, never really a believer, or did you actually have a religious background?
I didn't grow up in a strong religious household. There wasn't much discussion of religion. My mother, when I was growing up, did identify as Christian. She doesn't anymore. But actually, when I went into university, I started taking classes, and once I started learning about different religions and those kind of things, and the history of them, and really starting to give it critical thought, I found that there was nothing about it that made sense to me, that I identified with, that I really saw a lot of value in for myself personally. And so at that point, I really decided that, the correct title for me was atheist, and have continued on since then. I'll be honest with you, for the most part, for me, as I said, this is my first step towards activism, especially in this area. And I never found it to be an issue. I have many religious friends. And so, I feel that we can all respect each other's differing beliefs. And I haven't found that on a personal level to be an issue. That has changed a bit in this last week or two.
I bet.
But, it's definitely a good life experience.
What about you, Luke?
I grew up in the southwest of England, in a gorgeously, quaint, upper middle class England, Church of England, but, a family where we didn't do any religion at home. I grew up believing in the Christian God, doing the Lord's Prayer every day in school, ironically, and, going to church for Easter and Christmas and weddings and funerals. I actually don't remember ever having an epiphany. There was never a moment when I went, wow, this is all bullshit. There was never that moment. And I don't remember when it was. I couldn't tell you whether I was 15 or 25, but in there somewhere. But I think, like a lot of people, it was 9/11 that actually had me go, whoa, I need to reevaluate how religion seems to be showing up in the world. Started paying a little more attention to it. And then, of course, 6 years ago, was the beginning. And again, like Dusty, I had no issue with religion per se, no issue with my religious friends. But then 6 years ago, I found out my public school was making my daughter recite the Lord's Prayer every morning, and no one had actually managed to mention the fact that they did that to her.
So it just, it was sprung on you just like that. Now, how did you feel about that, actually?
Well, I mean, I was a solid atheist 6 years ago, but not an activist atheist. And so, we've looked around the school system, and of course the school system here in Alberta, and especially in St. Albert at the time, was a little peculiar in that the public system was actually the Catholic system, and this was an anomaly here in Alberta. But the Catholic system was the public system, the separate system was the Protestant system, and then there were rural school districts adjoining. And so the Catholic system was obviously not for us as a family, and the Protestant system, although essentially secular, if you enrolled into the separate system and you were not of faith, you actually potentially lost certain rights. But anyway, these things didn't matter because the Goldilocks school was just down the road, and it was actually a third rural district. And they had this wonderful little school, and we went in and we checked it out, and there were no crucifixes and no Ten Commandments, no mention of God anywhere. We looked through all the school brochures, nothing gaudy, all good to go. And in fact, we'd been there for 2 years because my daughter did, pre-K and then kindergarten, and both of those things started later in the day. So we were quite immersed in the whole school community by the time my daughter went into grade 1. And I remember my wife coming home from the first day of taking her to school, because of course at 8:55, the opening of school, suddenly everyone stops, and it always reminded me of the movie Stepford Wives. I don't know why, the original, not the remake. But it was really kind of weird. Everyone just stopped, and then over the loudspeakers, there was the Lord's Prayer, and then it was everyone with their heads down, some people mumbling, and we were just amazed. We had no idea that this was going on. And incidentally, at the time, that was actually contrary to the Alberta Human Rights Act, that they weren't even telling parents that they were doing it.
Now, are you referring to Bill 44, or are you referring to the original?
Yeah,
Bill
Section 11.
Section 11, yeah. And yeah, I would have actually used the birds as my choice for film, but the creepy scene where they're walking through the quiet birds. But
they didn't wait till everybody was in their seats and bowing in their seats. In my school, they always waited and everybody was in first period, and that was the first thing we did. So you bowed your heads in your seat as they recited it over the loudspeaker.
Sorry, go on.
You said they just stopped what they were doing, what they were at that time, and just didn't matter where everybody was? I'm just trying, the picture in my head that I got as you were talking was definitely odd.
Well, there's a number of people that know me that listen to this, and they're going, it's because he was late. Because everything that I and my wife do, we're late for.
Okay.
And so when I would take my daughter to school, I was one of the last rushing down the corridor, trying to get my child to the classroom before O Canada and the Lord's Prayer hit. But usually what would happen is you'd just be in the corridor as it would go off. And so then you'd have to stand there and of course then the funny thing was, because we weren't Christian, and the prayer was irrelevant to us, and I wanted to get my child into the classroom, I would kind of walk slowly, and it was like trying not to disturb the birds. We were
right.
kind of walking, everyone else was stood still, and we'd creep slowly towards the classroom. But you get the stink eye, it's not okay.
Oh, brother.
So, yeah, they should have been in the classroom now, but it has just triggered a thought. And through this period of months that we went through this before we said something, someone else was late to that school, and it was a Muslim family.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that might have been on purpose.
Yeah.
It was months later that I found out that they were actually intentionally late. They weren't the total disaster that I was in the morning. They were intentionally late because they wanted to miss the press.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why I thought they would be doing that intentionally. What about you, Dusty? How did you come to find that your local public school was giving your children religious instruction without really any say-so from you?
It's actually similar to Luke as well. I was bringing my child into school late one day, because we were at I can't remember if it was a dentist appointment or doctor's appointment, but, again, shoes off at the door, kind of rushing to get to the classroom kind of thing. All of a sudden hear that over the loudspeaker. And, I literally had to stop and go, wait, what is that? Am I hearing that correctly? And, I was. And I was in the hallway when that was being broadcast. I could hear it clearly there. And so I happened upon it by accident as well. I had never been informed. I had never been given an option for my children to opt out. There was no discussion, acknowledgement, anything from the school on that part. I just discovered it by accident.
Now, is this a common thing in Saskatchewan, or do you know if there are any other school districts in Saskatchewan that do this?
I know that, Luke's got some more familiarity about the Lloydminster, the recent, Lloydminster.
Which side of Lloydminster, though?
I believe it falls into Saskatchewan. Luke's got a little more information on that one.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Lloydminster is smack on the border, and literally down one street is the border, and one side is Alberta, one side is Saskatchewan. Makes things interesting when it comes time for the daylight savings time change. Saskatchewan is the only place that doesn't change their time, but Alberta does. It goes to daylight savings time. So I don't know. That'd be kind of weird. But anyway, go ahead, Luke.
Well, as far as Lloydminster is concerned, you're absolutely correct. Straddles the border, but the whole city education-wise, falls under the purview of Saskatchewan. And a few years ago, myself and the Edmonton Journal, not in tandem, I should say, but we were both, looking at this issue and we were phoning around. We were trying to get an idea of how many schools and school boards were still doing this. And I phoned Lloydminster, not knowing that they fell into the other side. But what I learned at the time, and so this is about 4 years ago, give or take, was that there was about 16 schools in Lloydminster, maybe 14, both, elementary and high, and that split between public and Catholic separate. And the amazing thing was that every single public school in Lloydminster did the Lord's Prayer in the morning, except for the Catholic school. So your choice, if you were a child in Lloydminster, was you could go to a public school and do the Lord's Prayer every morning, or you could go to a Catholic school. Now, I am kicking myself so bad because there's a bunch of great guys, or great people, I should say, that got it together and went after the school board just in this last year or so. And the school board, as best I can tell, didn't even put up a fight. Just said, you're correct, it's time. And with some letters of reason and some communication of reason, the public school board for Lloydminster, ceased doing the Lord's Prayer in all its public schools, just like that.
Well, that's a success story, That's what should happen.
I will dig out the name of the leader of that group because they deserve a shout out.
So we've also got a history of this in both Saskatchewan and Alberta, and probably Ontario as well. It seems to me that Ontario doesn't do public school prayer anymore, if memory serves, but Saskatchewan and Alberta still do, and it's entrenched in their provincial constitutions. Luke, you might be able to speak to that.
Yeah, the background on this is that when Alberta and Saskatchewan came into Confederation in 1905, they leveraged a couple of prior documents from 1905, earlier in 1905, that was originally from 1901, and they went into then for Alberta, the Alberta Act. So it's part of our constitution, and it's the Northwest Territory School Ordinance, and in Chapter 29, Section 137, in fact, if I may, what I'll do is I'll read Section 137 and Section 137.2, because they're both relevant and I think interesting to this group. So here it goes. Now, from 1901, religious instruction. No religious instruction, except as hereinafter provided, shall be permitted in the school of any district from the opening of such school until 1/2 hour previous to its closing in the afternoon, after which time any such instruction permitted or desired by the board may be given. Now that's really important because when we talk about the religious privilege given by this document, the section that I've just read to you, very, very explicitly says no religious instruction during the day until the last 30 minutes, other than time for the Lord's Prayer, 137.2, it shall, however, be permissible for the board of any district to direct that the school be opened by the recitation of the Lord's Prayer. So there we have it. Section 137, limit any religious instruction to the last 30 minutes of the day. So just look at your local Catholic schools, your public Christian schools, and all the public schools that run the Logos Christian program. They're all breaking the Constitution, but no one's saying anything. And the new Education Act, that hasn't been brought in yet, but has been kicking around for the last 5 years, actually changes. It says that religious instruction can be any time during the day, and that it doesn't just have to be the Lord's Prayer, it can be any prayer. But of course, the funny thing is they're trying to bring in a piece of provincial law that doesn't supersede the Constitution. So it's kind of funny that they're bringing in this law, even though they can't actually follow it, because they're still limited by what it says here in the Constitution.
Yeah. And so, Dusty, when you found out about this, what was your what steps did you take initially to rectify things?
Initially I made a call into the principal and had a kind of a chat with her about why they would do this and what the purpose was and those kind of things. And she gave me it's a long-standing practice that has continued to be revisited and supported by our community council line. She and I batted it around a bit and that kind of thing. And, by the end of the conversation, it was clear I was still in disagreement with it. So she said if I wanted it reviewed further, I should, write a formal letter. And so I did that just a couple of days later and, wrote a letter to her, and I sent a copy to the director of the school division, and as well as the Minister of Education and the Deputy Minister of Education here in Saskatchewan, and sent that off to her. And it was acknowledged by everyone, and they said they were going to be reviewing it at the school community council meeting. And having to talk about that. And a couple days before they did that, they sent out a newsletter to parents and an email and all those kind of things, very generally speaking, asking for feedback on their daily practice of the Lord's Prayer. And so they did that. It didn't take too long for the school, just a couple days after that school SCC, School Community Council meeting, that they said they had received a response of 70% of the parents. And of that 70%, 91% agreed and supported that they wanted to continue the Lord's Prayer every day. And they were going to go with that majority vote, essentially, and request that the school board allow them to continue with that daily practice. And so that was right before Christmas, just this past Christmas here in December. And that didn't sit well with me. So I called the school board and said, when's the next meeting? When's this going to be discussed? Can I get on the agenda and speak to the board directly? And so they did that, put me on the agenda. So that was January 5th here a few weeks ago. I went in and made a presentation to the school board, pointing out the wide variety of reasons that I thought that they shouldn't be allowing or directing the school to continue this practice. There was a little bit of debate afterwards, and the vote came down 6 to allow the school to continue and 3 against. And that was that. So, and then a couple of days later, I was frustrated for a few days. I understand that within the law, they are allowed to make that decision, but, they are also allowed to not make that decision. And, it does not sit well with me. And, so a few days later, I was, kind of racking my head. What can I do to kind of galvanize support and, try and make a change in this area and that kind of thing. And so I had started up an online petition, which was honestly really a Sunday night on the couch, kind of going through my head. It was really a very, off the cuff thing to do. Again, born out of frustration that I just felt like there was kind of nothing else for me to do at that point. And, I did that on a Sunday night and I posted it to my Facebook, and within a day or two, our local paper called and, go ahead.
Oh no, that's interesting that the paper called. I want to hear more.
Well, that was, and I don't know if that was, I think that the original article in our local newspaper was from the school board meeting the week before. And when he called and he said, I see that he spoke to the board about this issue, and I'm just wondering if you would like to talk about it. And I said, I sure would. And, there was a couple of days of media in there, and, that's got really everybody talking quite a bit in our community, and, really province wide. And honestly, I've received messages from people around the world. It's really been amazing. Of course, not all of the response has been good, but, it's all actually gone really rather quickly. But, the wonderful thing about, there was some newspaper articles and, some radio talk shows, that news talk that I was on, and then I ended up doing several TV interviews and those kind of things. And it did get people talking. It made people aware that this is the legislation that we currently have that allows this, that it still is going on in schools, that local schools and local school boards still have the power and the inclination to make these decisions. So it was really valuable to bring awareness to this whole issue in our province that a lot of people really, I think, assumed, wasn't an issue, didn't happen. And, if they had been asked to stop or whatever, that they would. And, it was really, so that was a real benefit to that.
Yeah. Luke, how have you found it to be, in terms of the knowledge level that this kind of thing actually is occurring? Do you find that a lot of people don't know about this, or is it more about an apathetic attitude towards things?
It's a bit of both. If I can throw in another little piece of history here, at the end of the 80s, the Ontario Court of Appeal looked at a court case called Zylaberg versus Sudbury Board of Education. I think it was 1988. And what they were ruling on was the fact that a minority faith child was in a school where the majority were Christian and they were all doing the Lord's Prayer. And as most pieces of legislation allow, you have the privilege, and the word privilege is used, you have the privilege of stepping out of the in-group, the main group, to go stand in the corridor on your own or whatever it is.
To have the bullseye painted on your chest.
Yeah, absolutely. You have the privilege of, now Zylaberg, took this to court, and the court ruled that absolutely, even if you give a child the option of standing out in the corridor, that still denies the child and the family their charter right, or specifically a fundamental freedom. And that fundamental freedom is the fundamental freedom of freedom from religion. And I know people will look at the charter and they go, I didn't know it said from in there. No, it just says of, but the Supreme Court has ruled on a number of occasions, most notably in Big M Drug Mart, the Lord's Day ruling, that the fundamental freedom of religion is also freedom from religion. So the court ruled that when the majority is doing the Lord's Prayer, making some small kid have the choice or not of stepping out, failed to provide freedom from religion on 3 counts, because it was coercive, because it stigmatized the child, and because it forced the family to publicly self-identify their religious beliefs. So in Ontario, they stopped doing the prayer in 1989 because of that ruling. In 1989, a year later, the BC Supreme Court in Rousseau versus Regina just ruled identically. They essentially adopted the Zylaberg ruling in its entirety. So there's a strong precedent for you. And today in BC, we don't do this. In fact, BC very specifically says that the public system has to be secular. So those 2 court cases took place, and the rest of Canada went, well, okay, that makes sense. That's clear. We're all going to stop doing it. And so for those of a certain age, most will say in the 90s, usually in the beginning of the 90s, they stopped doing the Lord's Prayer or they don't remember doing it. And it's because most places, even in Alberta, most places stopped doing it in the early 90s because of these rulings. And I should just throw in there, and of course Dusty's going to know this more than me, there was a tribunal, so not a court ruling, not a Queen's Bench ruling, but a tribunal ruling in Saskatchewan called Fancy versus whatever school district it was, that was very, very slightly different because it was recitation of the Lord's Prayer at different parts of the day and Bible reading. But again, the tribunal came back, not a ruling, a recommendation, and said, you really need to just stop directing your schools to recite the Lord's Prayer. So every single time a Canadian court has looked at this issue, they've said, this isn't okay, you've got to stop doing it. But the answer in Alberta is, and sorry to be harsh or blunt, but the Christians are going, yeah, we know it's not fair, we know that all these courts say it's not right and that we're denying you your right, but we got a loophole and we don't care. And that's the current status quo.
Yeah.
What do you think with the new government? Could anything possibly change?
Well, in Alberta, you mean not in Saskatchewan. I mean, Saskatchewan has a
Alberta.
rather religious premier.
Well, Brad Wall, yeah. But with Alberta, I mean, that's where we're having the biggest problem now, it seems like.
Go on.
With Dusty's case, where is it now?
Well, Dusty's in Saskatchewan.
Moose Jaw, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're wondering where we are right now?
Yeah, right now, because that's a short period of time between when you started the petition and now.
That's exactly right. And, you're right about our government. I've had to, obviously I have done a lot of learning and reading and educating about this entire issue and what's been done in the past. And, obviously, there are a number of choices about where to go forward. One of which is to do nothing, which I'm not personally fond of. I'm not happy to go, well, I did my bit and there's nothing left to be done, because I think there is. There's a couple of other ways, to go, lobbying, our politicians, in order to make some kind of meaningful change to the legislation.
Well, speaking of that, did you actually get any response from the government of Saskatchewan?
They did. Yeah, they did say we've put our person in charge, our regional superintendent, to discuss it with the school board and all those kind of things. And after the school board meeting, I did contact that superintendent and had a discussion with her. But honestly, everybody's response has pretty much been, you know what, they're well within their legal right to be able to make that decision. You may not like it, you might not agree with it, and so, again, was my frustration as far as trying to determine if there's what the possibility would be to change that legislation through, lobbying efforts and those kind of things. We are having an election coming up here, a provincial election in the beginning of April. But you're right about our government is likely, it's likely going to be a similar government to what it is now. And, it's been clear from their point of view that, they're probably not on the same side of this issue that I am. And, so I don't think that that's going to be successful anytime soon.
Yeah. So you've gone to the Human Rights Commission in Saskatchewan?
I have. I had a discussion with them yesterday. And, one of my main questions was because of this ruling that Luke just referred to, the Fancy versus Saskatoon School Division. And in fact, one of those parents from that case tracked me down this week and called me and wanted to kind of have a chat with me and that kind of thing. And that parent has been living in Ontario for the last 10 years even. It was interesting. It's interesting to get those phone calls from people like that. But anyhow, I had a discussion with the woman from Saskatchewan Human Rights, just because there was no kind of enforceable change. It seemed like the tribunal in Fancy versus Saskatoon School Division was a non-binding. And so my kind of question to her is, is that where we still are with this? And they've apparently since made a change that this does go through the Court of Queen's Bench. And, effectively, there could be a ruling that would force change in the legislation. That looks like it's the most prudent way to go at this point.
I'm just wondering if a charter challenge might be in the works here? Because, I mean, this seems to be just ripe. You have a situation where you have one part of the law, the provincial law, saying it's okay that they do this. They don't have to, but they're still within their purview. And the Charter of Rights, which has already been used to eliminate prayer from city council meetings all across the country. And I'm just wondering if that's another avenue that we could go.
It's this is where it gets complex, and I'm going to attempt to speak to this, but I speak to this as an amateur guy who spent the last few years looking at this, not a constitutional lawyer. So please don't sell your house or anything based on anything I say here. It requires this act in Alberta, and I believe it's the same in Saskatchewan.
Pretty similar in Saskatchewan.
Is not only part of the Alberta Act, so the Alberta Constitution, it is part of the federal Constitution. And of course, part of that says, and I don't have it in front of me, but was it Section 98 is, nothing shall, prejudice the rights of, separate and religious schools and, all this kind of stuff. So, and because this document is originally from 1901, this is arguably part of the federal constitution. So there is nothing that trumps it. Yeah, there is only agreement to change it. There is nothing that trumps it. And the way that constitutional change comes is either by, depending on how they view where this legislation lands, it either falls under the constitutional change formula of 50% of the population and 70% of the states, provinces and territories. So there's that. Or it's just a vote in the House of Commons, which would essentially be a rubber stamp. But again, it still has to go to the Fed to get changed. But there is also this interesting anomaly where, and this applies to separate schools as well as this issue, and that is that education exclusively falls under the purview of the province as part of the Constitution and the Charter. And so there is also a legal argument that actually the government of Alberta could do this themselves because it's an education matter. Or another legal argument that says that getting separate schools and this prayer forced on us from the feds essentially, because in 1904 Alberta actually, or not Alberta because it wasn't Alberta, the Northwest Territory actually decided against separate schools, and yet in 1905 we took them because Wilfrid Laurier made a deal with the Catholics of Quebec that we would be more religiously nice to the Catholics.
And the irony is, of course, that there is no Catholic school system in Quebec anymore.
No, that's right. It's like your wife left you a decade ago, but you're still sitting at home on Saturday nights being faithful to her. It just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But anyway, the bottom line is it does require a constitutional change. Now, I do have a legal argument, and it's this. My hope is that the Human Rights Commission does do something about this. It is clearly wrong. We have 2 human rights complaints from 2 separate school districts in Alberta that are currently being filed and they're being looked at. We have a 3rd one pending. So my hope is that human rights take this on because a charter challenge requires a lot of fundraising. But there is the potential for a civil suit here that would be a lot less expensive. And here's what that looks like. When you send your child to a school district, especially a public school district, and it's your school district because of where you live, you have absolutely a reasonable expectation that that school district will not do anything that it is not forced to do that would potentially harm your child or that would take away any of their charter rights. Okay? It's absolutely reasonable that the school has a fiduciary duty of care to the children that it has. Now, it has no legal compulsion at all to perform the Lord's Prayer, right? There is no law, there is no right that exists personally that I can send my child to a public school and expect or demand that they will participate in the school-led recitation of the prayer. That right does not exist anywhere. The only right that exists, as we talked about earlier, is the option that a school board may choose to direct that a school open with the recitation of the Lord's Prayer. So what we have here is a school and a school board that absolutely has a legal duty of care to Dusty's kids, to not do things that would deny them their rights or potentially harm them, and they are voluntarily choosing to do that. And that, I think, leaves them in civil legal jeopardy.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that makes me want to be a constitutional lawyer, because this is you have no idea when you roll the dice which side is going to land. It's there's all sorts of competing what's the word I'm looking for? Competing interests. I mean, there's constitutional ones on a federal level, provincial level, charter of rights and freedoms. It's all over the place, and one of them has got to win out.
Well, with the new federal government as well, and he seems quite friendly towards, rights for Muslims and everybody else too. I mean, this infringes upon all kinds of religions. I mean, they might be the minority at the moment in these schools, which I don't quite understand why these schools still have so many people that are Christian versus diversity that you would see elsewhere. I mean, I've never heard about prayer in school in Calgary. I mean, I think it is more diverse. Is it because these rural areas are less diverse?
Yeah.
I would think so in my area. Like, I mean, my kids go to, quote, the farm school, and the majority of kids, and in fact, they don't allow city kids in anymore just for population and that kind of thing. But almost all of the kids at my children's school are bused in from rural areas around the city, and so that's, I think, the case. What's going on in my case.
I think the key words here, both legally and as Canadians, is reasonable accommodation, and that is that we legally recognise, and if we're good neighbours, we actually also just recognise through empathy that there are conflicting perspectives and rights here, and how can we best manage them? Now,
I feel for the Muslims that were showing up late in your child's school.
Yeah, absolutely. But to share something from our personal perspective, it was really quite interesting that. And also it's important for when putting in human rights complaints to have made sure that you follow reasonable avenues to, find solutions before you put in an official complaint.
Which you both do.
So when we had the issue with our daughter's school, we were ambushed at a parent council meeting. The principal, asked us to go to the council meeting and just try and explain to the other parents why we wanted this change. And it was nuts. I mean, I promise you it was nuts. There was one other family there that was against the prayer who'd actually asked for their child to be exempt before us, and they'd been turned down. And by the way, it is against the law, it's against the charter, it's against everything. I can tell you half a dozen cases around Alberta where the principal is gone, and this is a direct quote from a principal in Grand Prairie. There's one of you and there's lots of them, and I'd rather piss off one of you. Okay?
Piss off?
That's shocking. Yeah.
Right, be damned. So we went to this council meeting, and there were 50 parents, and it was nasty, and it was my first experience of this, and I was blown away. Like, it was nasty. And we're trying to understand, so what's the deal with the Lord's Prayer? And we said, well, so why is it so important to you? And one of them saying, well, it's where we get our values from.
Ugh.
Oh dear.
And so I said, well, so what values do you have that I don't have? And this room just fell silent, because of course the only value is belief, which is, not really much of a value, I don't think.
Character flaw.
Not a value. So we said, well, look, why don't we take all the values from the Lord's Prayer that you think important, but not the gaudy bit, and we'll come up with a school mantra. Right? A school mantra. Like, how much more personal and inclusive could it be that we get together as a community and we write a school mantra, all the important values, but not the gaudy bit? Nope, not going to do that. What about a moment of silence? Nope, don't want to do the moment of silence. Now here's the thing. In the school at the time, we had the Christian Logos program that ran unconstitutionally 3 afternoons a week. And we said, and half the school, 50% of the school was in the Christian program. So we even said, look, how about this? We'll do the Lord's Prayer, we'll do a moment of silence together, everybody, every morning. And then 3 days a week, when you guys are doing your Christian Logos program, you can pray during the Christian Logos program. Nope, that's not good enough either. Wow. So it didn't matter what we did to try and accommodate them. It literally was our way or the highway. And I got to tell you, we were driven out of that school. A year later, we left. They stopped inviting my children to birthday parties. My wife is a strong woman. One of the reasons I fell in love with her. She went to a Thanksgiving celebration, and she was bullied by other mothers that she shouldn't be there because Thanksgiving was a religious thing.
Oh, that old trope. It's not secularized at all.
I came home, I found my wife crying in her minivan in my driveway, and I've been seriously pissed about this ever since.
No kidding. It's so small-minded, and it is quite common of small towns, but where your child was at school, it wasn't that small. I mean, in Blackfields, I expected that when there was I think it was a whole 7,000 people, but I think that community is much larger.
Yeah, St. Albert's 70,000, but the Sturgeon School District, the rural district, and what had happened is St. Albert had grown to encompass this rural school. But again, it's, we bent over backwards to try and find, reasonable ways to, because we've said 1,000 times, the issue here is that it's state-led, right? The school is leading the prayer, and it's only one religion.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that people don't understand is we're not saying that children can't pray.
Absolutely.
It's the school-led prayer, the endorsement of religion, of a particular religion.
Over the loudspeaker, I mean, you were not being unreasonable, asking for a school mantra, a moment of silence, all kinds of compromises. Yet these people, they tell each other in their churches, and I've heard this because, I've gone to the churches in Alberta, and they tell their children, don't be friends with these people, they're evil, they're atheists, atheism is the cause of all evil on earth, and the fact that they can't get past their own small-minded lies to themselves is what makes them hate any affront to their so-called privilege.
So I'm nodding. You can't see me, but I'm nodding.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm thinking that goes beyond exerting privilege to, downright bullying.
Yeah, you'll have to excuse Twyla. She's very intolerant.
Well, I grew up with all of this too. I mean, I got beat up every day in class because people knew I wasn't in their church. I mean, it's a small town. They know you're not coming to church.
And that's one thing I find really ironic about this entire situation is the number of people who have said, just have your kids stay out in the hall, just have your kids go do whatever, this and that and the other thing. And they say that without the expectation that there will be any consequences to the kids. And yet, the number of adults who are willing and able and do so with gusto, bullying other adults merely for standing up and saying, I disagree with the prayer and I don't think it should be said. I wouldn't want to participate. Even all of the media that I have done over the last few weeks, I have stood up and said, this is what I did. The decision came down. I agree that there is legislation that allows that. I disagree with it for these reasons. I have been very respectful towards the school and the board and the school community council and the other parents and those kind of things. But the hatred and vitriol that has been directed towards me for standing up and saying that publicly, and yet that's the answer that everybody goes to is have your kids just stand outside the out in the hallway, which the prayer can still be heard. Just have your kids do this. Have your kids show up late. Have your kids, and yet those are the same people who will just rip me to shreds for standing up and saying I disagree with the practice. It is mind-boggling to me.
It's not inclusive. These people don't understand this is not inclusive, and you shouldn't be doing that in this day and age.
Oh, I agree.
What's even crazier is you're not disagreeing over what color to paint the hallway. Your child is being denied a fundamental freedom given them by the Canadian Charter. This is not a disagreement. Your child and your family has a right. And the bottom line in all this, and what I'm finding is a modern, secular, well, let's not use the word crusader, we'll go with activist, is that the Supreme Court of Canada holds freedom of religion and freedom from religion as equal fundamental freedom. But in the public's eye, freedom of religion is paramount. And no one gives a shit about freedom from.
Well, are they not, like, my understanding is they're basically synonymous, because your freedom of religion means you don't have to be any other religion. That means that you are free from those religions. If you choose to be, Christian or whatever, you're choosing not to be another religion, right? So the two are practically synonymous.
Yeah, and in this case, no one is being, if the school does not lead with the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, no one is actually having their freedom of religion denied them, because any child at any point in their personal time can go to a room. In fact, we suggest that there are actually rooms set aside for these children to do so, and they can go and pray. So no one is infringing upon their freedom of religion. But as we saw with Gobsberg and Rousseau and Fancy, if you are coerced into participating in prayer, state-led prayer, then you're being denied your freedom from religion. So in this case, there's only actually one group that are being denied rights, and it's the God.
Us heathens, yes.
Well, in this case, everybody who's not Catholic is having their rights infringed on.
Yeah, or Christian, that's right.
Yeah, I was going to say, how would the people that are so vitriolic toward you feel if say we decided, let's switch it over to a Scientology prayer or a Muslim prayer or something? They know bloody well that wouldn't fly with them,
But they're the majority.
Absolutely, and that's exactly right. I took the words right out of my mouth.
Right.
They are confident in their. I know they are confident in their position, that they are in the majority, and that counts for more than anybody else. That's a question that was often asked of me by the media last week, as far as, 91%, the majority of parents want this. What's your response to that? And my response was, why would you as a school respect only 91% of your students when you could make a choice to respect 100% of them?
Good answer.
That makes no sense in my head. There's nowhere in the school board handbook, which I quoted in my presentation to them, regarding their commitment to make their decisions in the best interest of the students, that it doesn't say in the best interest of some of the students, most of the students, 91% of the students, the majority of the students. So if you can make a decision that is respectful and supportive of 100% of your students, as opposed to 91% or whatever the number is less than 100, why would you make that decision?
Well, and there's the other issue that I see here, and that is the value of that choice. What real value does anyone gain by everybody sitting around for 2 minutes reciting a bunch of words in the morning?
Well, that's a question that I want to ask, is what are the arguments in favor of having prayer that you've heard?
Luke had one.
I mean, I didn't ask for good arguments. I just asked for the arguments, because we know there's no good arguments.
I just want to say, I've actually got to give a tip of the hat to, a number of religious people, or even people that are, perhaps pretty forgiving and generous in their view. Roger Kincaid and Breakfast on News Talk down your way. He's a good Christian fella. I know Paula Simons, who is kind of a secular Jew up here in Edmonton. But them and others have all raised the point that, if you're going to participate in faith, then do it joyfully. Do it genuinely. Do it from a place of, for all the right reasons. Otherwise, really, you're devaluing the faith. You're dishonoring the faith. Beyond that, someone said that I had a good reason for doing the prayer. I certainly can't remember being given one.
Well, no, but just
that
not
one
necessarily
they
good
told
ones.
you about. That's where they get their
something like that
or whatever from.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for good ones. You're not going to find any good ones.
Well, actually, let me just say the most enjoyable one that I got was someone who responded and said, I wish that I would have said the Lord's Prayer when I went to school growing up, because I'm not religious. And now when I'm at a wedding or a funeral, I don't know the words. I was like, oh, finally, there's a reason.
That's actually very clever. But, there's also...
I thought so too. I had appreciation for his viewpoint.
It's interesting that there's now a discussion at the federal level of changing the wording of the national anthem. which is another. I'd like to see them go godless with that too. I mean, they're Go ahead.
Didn't they do that? I remember my kindergarten teacher told us that it was changed when I was in kindergarten, and for some reason, that's the only time I heard that it was changed. We didn't sing it with the word God. We just said, "Oh, keep our land," instead of "God, keep our land."
Yeah,
so I don't
changed.
know.
Yeah, I believe you're right that it was changed in around the 80s.
Yeah, when I was going to kindergarten. So
I don't believe that's the case, but trust me, I guess between me and Nate would be the least likely to know. But I don't think that's the case. And of course the preamble is still there in the charter too.
Oh, but it's ignored.
No, absolutely. And legally it's also ignored.
No, that's what I mean.
But it's, I would say this. I think there are, as someone looking at the issue of secular problems or the inappropriate and unfair privilege of religion in the public sphere, I think there are lots of more important battles. And, and I wonder as an activist, if we go after too many in one go, do we scare people? If we go after the sacred cow of, O Canada, do we lose people that we might otherwise win if we were just to stick to things that were more clearly unfair, and impacted our children on a day-to-day basis?
Right. I mean, this exclusivity in schools in this day and age to me is appalling, and I don't understand why majority gets to rule and be the bullies any longer, because I might as well just be practicing Sharia law then too, because if we get a majority of Muslims in a school, there would be the same ridiculous argument and nobody would let it fly there. So why?
What happened in your school is a majority of people voted to take away a fundamental freedom of their neighbor.
Yeah.
They might as well, and I apologize for the hyperbole, but they might as well have voted to make the black kid use a different water fountain.
Perfect.
It is a fundamental right that you have.
Yeah.
But there's enough examples in both Canada and the United States where look at what happened with Ireland and gay marriage. It's nice that Ireland has gay marriage now, but they reinforced the notion that
of the democratic, right? They're up for vote. Rights are up for vote.
Yeah.
That bugs me too. Yeah. So where does it stand in your cases, Luke, right now?
So as best we can tell, there are, as a best guess, maybe 50 schools or more currently doing the Lord's Prayer every day in Alberta, public. We are aware of half a dozen where people have complained and not got change or have not got some sort of resolution that they are happy with. We have human rights complaints lodged in 2 school jurisdictions, and we will wait and see what those 2 look like before we then decide how to proceed, with another human rights complaint, or whether we do a fundraiser for a civil suit based on the argument that I gave earlier.
Luke, I'd like to ask a question because I know you talked about it. I got cut off for a minute. I'm confused because in the States, the Supreme Court can make a ruling that effectively changes the Constitution of the United States. Doesn't change the wording, but it changes the interpretation and how it is to be enforced and understood. And you're saying we can't do that here?
Let me say the first answer is I don't know. Okay,
it's really gray.
That's the first honest answer. There seem to be a number of different ways. So for example, there's a piece of legislation, Big M drug mart, the Lord's Day Sunday opening case. The Supreme Court says, okay, freedom of also means freedom from.
Okay.
So in that case, in one fell swoop, the Supreme Court, invented a new context for the Constitution. But at the same time, if we want to change this prayer issue or the separate school issue, which is of course another hot one right now, then it's going to require constitutional change that, as best I understand, is likely to need either federal approval or even the full constitutional amendment formula, which, as I said earlier, I think is 50% of the population in 70% of the provinces and territories. So that's as best as I understand.
Yeah, it's a complicated formula. There's also, just to interject, the court has also changed the Constitution, or they're actually, I'm not sure if it's the Constitution they changed, but it certainly are expectations that they've now said that there is an expectation of the separation of church and state, which effectively makes a new constitutional amendment almost out of thin air, which is nice.
Yes.
Well, so it sounds to me like, though, then you have identified two specific examples where the Supreme Court has altered or changed the interpretation of the Charter such that we are free from religion if we choose not to practice it. So my question then becomes, why doesn't that become the law of the land, and why don't we then have two different theories under which to file some kind of legal action to force all of this stuff to stop? Because if we're free from religion, according to the Supreme Court, we should be free from religion. And we aren't so long as they're practicing or reciting the Lord's Prayer.
As best I understand it, there are three legal routes. There's the human rights complaint, charter challenge, and a civil suit. The charter challenge and the civil suit both cost money.
So yeah, certainly money's always an issue, but I guess my question to you is, does the Supreme Court of Canada wield that kind of power in their decisions? Is there a flaw in the argument or the point that I just made that in fact there are theories that exist in law in Canada today?
They're still bound by the Constitution, though, so they can't work outside of that framework.
But they have, the Supreme Court defines the Constitution.
It interprets it.
That's right. So if they've interpreted it to mean that we're free from religion, and
so that's a charter. That's not in the Constitution. That's in the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So it's a different document.
And what you have, and this is why it gets so complex, is what we have is this get out of jail free card in the Constitution that says whatever religious rights you had preceding Federation and Confederation, nothing in law takes that away.
Except that that can be challenged on the basis of new information.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm
that's exactly what happened with the right to die law. The court didn't find itself bound by its earlier decision because new information was being presented.
My belief is that a civil suit will be far quicker. My hope is that the Human Rights Commission take this on and
I'm sure they will.
But they don't have the force of law, I understand.
No, but I think it would be pretty compelling. Because at this point, we're asking questions right now of Alberta Education saying, so why don't you have a policy? Because, Alberta Education is all over, quite rightly, the rights of the LGBTQ community. But they just will not get involved in the rights of non-Christians or in freedom from religion. They didn't want to get involved in Morinville. They just will not touch this. And so what we said to them is, all you have to do is enact a policy that says that school boards cannot enact policies where they have a reasonable cause to believe that they'll be denying the rights of children and families in their care. If they enact that policy, then these schools are now unable to do the prayer.
And that would be perfectly fine in the provincial system because education is a provincial responsibility.
That's right. And it would solve all the problems in one foul swoop, and it's absolutely reasonable. I mean, how is that not reasonable to just say, hey, school board, how about you voluntarily don't do things that deny rights to children in your care?
Well, the problem, Luke, is that you're imposing reason, and both you and Dusty have given examples where, quite frankly, there's no interest in imposing reason if it's going to take away that privilege they enjoy.
We're just telling them not to be dicks. I mean, that's really what it is. Don't be a dick.
You know what it comes down to? You can take this prayer out of my cold dead hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found that good.
Just now it's a thing, and that's it. They will change nothing.
So then they're going to start passing laws for open carry prayer.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
We have that in Calgary. What's that guy's name again? The hate monger. Yeah.
What's his name from? He ran
Calgary
for that.
Street Preacher.
Street preacher, yeah.
Well, no, it was his the guy that ran. It was one of Artur Pawlowski's proteges, and he ran for what was his name? The bus driver.
Yeah. Joey.
Jesse
Rao.
Jesse,
Rao. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's a piece of work. Anyway.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up there, Chris.
Before we, I don't know how long you, before you guys.
Oh, it doesn't matter. We can.
I want to just say, there's a few more things. So I want to throw a laundry list, or let's say a menu of things to keep an eye on in this sphere, for people in our community. So we still have, and, listen, I love St. Albert Public is a fantastic school district. My kids go there. I served on, chaired the school council, counseled the school councils. I love them. So, now I can say what I want. And that is, in our public school district, in half our schools, we still give out Gideon Bibles every year.
Right.
Oh, Lord.
That has to stop. We still do, Operation Christmas Child. And the issue is not just that we do it, but you know what? We do it without telling parents what it is they're signing up for.
Well, tell us what Operation Christmas Child is.
Oh, it's fantastic, and I should say it is chaired by the big Reverend's son. Nate, help me out here. Big Reverend in the US.
Billy Graham?
Son, his son, Jesse Graham, right? Franklin, that's the one. So Franklin's at the top of this, pulling in 200 G's, I think, for the privilege. So what they do, they have this wonderful idea where you have poor kids, let's imagine Africa or sub-Saharan, and the Western kids, we bring in a shoebox to school, and then we fill it full of really awesome school supplies, and we send it off to a school in Africa. Absolutely. What a great idea. I mean, how is that not a great idea? But here's the catch, and here's what they don't tell the parents, is that Christmas Child, and I can't remember the parent organization, they intercept your box, and they put a Bible in there, they put a leaflet in there. It is worth Googling because watching the video is frightening. And then when it gets sent to the child at the other end, what they get is a box sent from Christian children in the West, and now they're enrolled in their very own 12-step program where the local church now comes to their school, and off the back of charity, they now enroll them in this 12-step video program, and included in that is, threat of hell and all this kind of stuff. It's absolutely disgusting. And if Western parents in public schools actually knew the reality of what was going on, they would never do it in a heartbeat. And public schools...
I'm aware of it, but I don't know how to stop it, because my daughter came home with a note asking for items, and I was like,
I did it last year.
What do I even do?
That's why I'm still mad.
Yeah, I actually, when my daughter was in elementary school, they were doing that too, but then somebody must have complained because it stopped. And if I had known, I would have been that person, but somebody else beat me to it, I guess, right? And good for them. And I wasn't aware, or else I would have participated and I would have, raised hell. Right?
Yeah, I didn't participate, but I didn't raise hell. I just, I don't know.
So here's another thing for your list here, in and around Edmonton. We have the Pregnancy Care Centre, which is,
right.
Yeah.
They're still coming into our schools and promoting
schools?
Into our public schools.
Abstinence only.
Right.
6,000 people a year in Alberta.
How do they get away with that? Because we have curriculum here that,
It's extra.
Huh.
It's part of sex ed, and they are approved vendors in a lot of school districts, because of course the teachers don't want to do it. It's awkward and icky to talk to your students about this stuff, and so these nice people come in, they look like they meet the curriculum, and so it's easier for everyone, and of course it's free. But of course they're pushing abstinence oriented, guilt, purity, and all this stuff. And what was really interesting to me when I was dealing with this here in St. Albert was that the president of the Pregnancy Care Centre when publicly in the newspapers and to the local school group were saying, no, this is a fact-based, scientific, sexual education program. But we actually got hold of an audio recording of her presenting what they were doing to her local church just up the road. And let me tell you, what she's telling them they're doing is a whole different thing than what they're selling to the local school board. You know, they are talking about it being an abstinence-only program, that they're talking about purity and chastity, that they're ignoring issues on homosexuality and all this kind of stuff. So again, you know, I mean, there are so many pressures, religious pressures in our secular environment that I think most people would be amazed. You know, it's like constantly playing whack-a-mole. That every time you get rid of one of these people from over here pushing their stuff on your kids, another one pops up over here pushing it on your kids.
Well, and I think it's more than just abstinence only that they're pushing, because if I'm not mistaken, they've said things like, you know, a girl who has premarital sex is like a used piece of chewed up gum and crap like that, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. And in fact, you know, when we went public, and there's a wonderful lady up here called Kathy who runs AIM. When we went public with this, they suddenly changed their website overnight, but we managed to lift a lot of the graphics and get screenshots from it. And I mean, the one graphic that I still have, it's this red background, and the font is frightening. I mean, the font is just frightening, and it's red, and there's razor wire, and there's condoms draped over the razor wire, and it just says safe sex ? Here they are, actually turning kids off of using condoms.
Wow.
That's what I want in my public.
Wow. Just wow.
Yeah, it's going on all over Alberta. Pregnancy Care Centre, Google it, look up, they have a section for how you can help in churches and all this good stuff. Take a look.
Well,
and they pass themselves off as a clinic, right? They even wear like lab coats at their so-called clinic and that kind of thing too. Because I've looked into this before too, and in fact, you know, yeah.
Fifth Estate did a show on them. They were telling false things to pregnant women to deter them from having abortions, like saying you're going to get cancer and all these things that aren't true about abortions. So
yeah,
their main goal is to preach from that point of view that you're not to get abortions, you're not to have. Well, it's all definitely. Well, would you say Catholic based or Christian based or?
I would say fear based.
Yeah.
Yes.
What they do is at no point do they tell you when you go in that they will not ever refer you for an abortion. So that's the first. They look like they're actually a service clinic, but they're not. And essentially what they do and what they've been called out on here and in places in the US is what they do is they're running down the clock for the pregnant youth, right? So you get this scared, lonely, 17-year-old or 16-year-old or 18-year-old or whatever, and they go in. They don't tell them at no point will they ever refer them for an abortion, and then they run the clock down on their option time.
And they will tell them lies about what will happen to them if they have abortion.
So before we go, Luke, can you tell us about A-People and the Society of Albertans United for the Separation of State and Church?
Yes, thank you. So if anybody's interested in activism, secular activism, particularly in the area of education in Alberta, but we do have Saskatchewan members as well. In fact, we even have members from Ontario because we, keep an eye on each other's fights and their effort to try and learn and support each other. On Facebook, A-People, A-P-U-P-I-L, our marketing people were up all night coming up with this. Alberta Parents for Unbiased Public Inclusive Learning.
Thank you.
About 4 years ago, or whenever we started this group, it was supposed to be a placeholder and we were going to change the name. We never have. But that is where to come and park yourself and just be part of the conversation surrounding prayer and sex ed and Gideon Bibles and disestablishing the separate school system, which is really heating up right now, the next 2 or 3 months.
About that.
Albertans United. In fact, Nate, I will be talking with our old buddy Dave King in the next 48 hours. About this, we will be launching the legal society through which, we will be, aiming to disestablish a separate school system. So that will become available via A Pupil. So A Pupil is the place to go on Facebook.
Yeah, good.
And Dusty, any last thoughts from you?
No, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. I have found that, the more people who are listening, the more people that are aware, the more people that are talking and thinking about this. I mean, I've had so many people over the last few weeks, short weeks, but very full ones where, someone has started out with an opinion, that prayer in school was okay. And because this has been brought up, they've talked to their family members, they've talked to other people about it, and they have, I'm surprised with the number of stories I'm hearing where someone says to me, hey, I had a talk, we discussed it from another point of view, we this and that and the other thing, and you know what? They agree. School probably isn't the place for it. So, I think as much awareness and as we can bring to this is just going to help us all the way along.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say I appreciate your approach to this. It's been very level-headed. It's very commonsensical, and just like what Luke said, why not a school mantra? Why moment of silence? Just coming to people with actual solutions and then getting rejected and bullied still. It just is beyond me that people get so angry about this. And it gives me hope, Dusty, to hear that you've actually heard people have changed their minds. So thank you.
Well, it is very nice to hear. And, the nice thing, for me personally is that a few weeks ago, I went to that school board meeting alone. Well, not alone. My husband was there supporting me every second. And he has had my back on this every moment. And whereas he was not, somebody in the past typically who would take a confrontational, controversial topic and feel comfortable speaking about it with anybody who stopped him on the street, he's had to change on that area pretty quick. And he's been great about it. But he was the only person with me at that school board meeting, and there was a small period of time where I felt pretty alone in this. Like it was just us and our family. And so many people have come out of the woodwork. They're talking to people. And I get nice messages from people who say, hey, I talked to so-and-so. Guess what? They saw the light kind of thing. And they understand. And even a few people have said, I've talked to some parents. They've changed their vote, which is not really, at this point doesn't really matter. But, it is very interesting how it has, galvanized this base, and really brought this to the forefront. I'm, old news as far as news goes, a few weeks ago here. And yet today in the newspaper, our local paper, there was still a letter to the editor about this issue and about me and all of those kind of things. So
was it favorable?
Still talking about it. No, it wasn't. But honestly, he made his points. His points made mine.
Yeah.
Me.
That's so often is the case. Yeah.
That's exactly. Many people have been doing that.
I'll put out one doom and gloom battle cry, and it's this: that if we're trying to change secular issues in education, the thing that we have to understand is that there are hundreds of thousands of people already in a group. In the Catholic school system, or in the Logos Christian programs, or that just strongly self-identify, with their Christian belief. And the church has an amazing ability to mobilize numbers because, of course, they have communication mechanisms and moral authority and all that kind of stuff. And secularists, whether they are agnostic, or even people of faith, because I want to make clear, we have people of faith that are cheering us on, because they think the separate school should be disestablished, or that only doing one prayer from one faith is wrong. But we tend to be an awful lot more apathetic, and if we really are going to affect change, it's going to require our community actually, getting off the sofa or getting out from behind the computer, instead of being angry on the computer, actually going down and meeting with their MLA, or going to, in fact, for what it's worth, the separate school system, and their issue over the trans washroom, legislation that the NDP just put in here. I mean, they just posted there's a rally now. They've got a rally coming up on May the 14th, and there's a big petition underway for them to ignore a new law that's being brought in to try and give an at-risk minority of kids some rights and some protection. So these guys are really good at mobilizing, and we're not so good. And if we really do want a secular society, and I'm not a secular absolutist. I just want to say, I'm really not a secular absolutist. But there is some serious inappropriate privilege going on that does need to be brought back, and we need to get off our ass.
And what are the hopes with this human rights right now? If we start banding together.
Well, the human rights complaints will live or die on their own merit.
Yeah.
And that's our hope that.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, no, that's right. So the hope
is there a place to go we can put our support behind it? Is there?
Not right now, because the way the human rights complaint process works is first you have to file one, then it actually has to be accepted. And the two in Alberta have been filed, but they haven't been accepted, although one has been noted and an extension was granted to the school board, a 1 month extension. And then once it's accepted, then it's in process, then we can publicize, then we can go public about it. So right now, I wouldn't be more specific about who, where, or when than we've been, because it hasn't even been accepted by the Human Rights Commission, let alone ruled on.
Right. Okay.
But once one is accepted, we will certainly make a more public venue for.
Thank you.
We will trumpet it from the mountaintops.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to thank you both for your activism, but I also wanted to add to your laundry list of things that I see coming on the horizon. That's these, for example, there's that ad that it's about rescuing your buddy if they're masturbating and this kind of thing, right?
Man.
So like it's a war scene. You don't know about that?
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah, so that's coming down the pipe, I'm sure, if it's not already manifest somewhere, And I think that's kind of contradictory with abstinence.
Well, chastity is an apprenticeship in self-mastery.
Yes, who was it said that?
Well, it's actually, I found out that is the catechism. It's from the catechism of the Catholic Church.
Huh.
So he plagiarized it.
Wow.
Or at least it inside.
We're talking about Fred Bishop Henry here in Calgary.
With the, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what's interesting about him is...
There's lots interesting
if we forget, the HPV vaccine issue, and it's slutty and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is a guy messing around with the rights and the safety of children, but when was it? 2002? He actually brought a convicted pedophile.
He did.
Into his diocese, and then didn't even tell his congregation about it.
Exactly, yeah. They were pissed.
Yep.
So, I don't think this is a guy that should have much of a say about kids and their well-being.
Certainly not morality.
Mm-hmm.
No. So the other thing I would say that's going to be interesting in watching how religion shows up in the public sphere, especially in education, is not just these trans rights, because I know that there are some not so fundamentalist Christians that are going, people that are still trying to wrap their heads around the concepts of transgenderism. But the GSA issue, the Bill 10 issue, is more straightforward, and that is, we're going to see Catholic schools and Catholic school boards refuse to allow GSAs in name. So they are going to break the law. They are going to knowingly and intentionally break the law because they believe, or they're trying to push the fact that they have a right to be Catholic in their Catholic schools beyond any external legislation. So what is mind-blowing is they are going to use public money to fight the public, who will also then have to spend money, so that they can ignore a law that the public so vehemently asked for in the first place.
Well, they're going Sharia. They're going Sharia, basically. I don't know what other name to put on it. They're just going basically what they would absolutely find appalling if some Muslims came to Canada and pushed their laws because, Islam, but these guys are doing it because Catholic. So, oh my goodness.
Theocracy.
Ignore the law, do what we want anyway, keep sending checks.
Well, it's a higher authority that they answer to, right? which never really talks back, or when it does, it just happens to agree with them. But that's beside the point. Okay.
Wow.
Well, thank you, Luke and Dusty, for joining us this evening. It's been a very interesting discussion and learned quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
Hopefully have you both on again as these things progress.
Yeah, keep up the good fight if you have the energy for it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, guys.
You've been listening to the Legion of Reason, coming to you from Calgary, Canada. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please consider reviewing us on iTunes. Music was provided by Dean Morrison and Graham Hill and used with permission.